Financial literacy is a mindset. It's not just about money. And my mother had the right mindset. This is a episode dedicated to my mother, Juanita Smith, a bad sister. Um, Grew up in the deep South, um, and um, very much like this uh, bandage I have on my hand, supporting my wrists, which I'm like an athlete of the brain, always working. I was writing a book, so wore my muscles out here, also recuperating. My mother just wore out her hustle. She wore out her dream. She wore out her life for her children. But rainbows only follow storms. You know that you cannot have a rainbow without a storm first. And so she went through stuff in order to become someone, just like you're going to do. And this is dedicated to single mothers everywhere who want to know you can make it. You can come up from nothing. My mother um, is the definition of legitimate hustle. Became a millionaire working just like you, many of you, an hourly job. So, small town, born in a small town in Alabama, moved to East St. Louis with her sisters and her brother. And her dad died before she was five, before there was Social Security. There was no social safety net, as we call it today. So her mother had to make a choice, right? And the choice was, do I send my kids um, everywhere, like break them up, break the family up, and because there was no welfare, there was no public assistance to take care of the family, there was no father at home anymore, right? Or do we all find a way, because we're better together, to make this work? And so grandmother, Vesta Murray, decided that they were going to make it work, and nobody cares. Work harder. Everybody had to work, so they went to go work as domestics because they did not have back then, options that we had today. They did not have higher education, so they went to go work for white families in private homes. And my mother, Juanita Smith's her name, she made $5 a day for the whole day, not an hour, for the whole day. And when she come home from working, um, my grandmother, her mother, would say, "What'd you make today, baby?" And my mother would say, "I made $5, Mom." And so Vester, my grandmother, would say, "Well, give me that $5. I'm going to the casino." Well, she didn't tell my mother that. She just went to the casino and she lost the money, their money. Now, I'm about to give you a big definition here in financial literacy. One of these lessons is not what you make, is what you keep, right? And if your outflow exceeds your inflow, then your overhead will be your downfall. And sometimes we save our worst behavior, family, for those we care the most about. Real talk. So just because somebody says they love you doesn't mean they know how to love. And there's a that old Southern saying again: no matter how much I love you, if I don't have wisdom, I can only give you my own ignorance. I'll repeat that: no matter how much I love you, my son or my daughter, if I don't have wisdom, I can only give you my own ignorance. I can only give you what I've got. In the blind town of one-eyed man's king, if you don't know better, you can't do better. So my grandmother knew enough to, when my grandfather passed, on my mother's side, to not break the family up and send the kids hither and thither and there around the country. And that's cool. But she did not know enough to encourage my mother and her sisters and brothers to go get higher education, which was really the way out back then. Today, we're trying to educate you to, you can go write a check, start a business. That's an option. Back then, it was just, they thought, cash a check, get a job. But they didn't think, with the exception of my uncle, by the way, Uncle Buddy, who did create his own business, sanitation business, amongst others. But generally speaking, the mindset was low frequency. Let me just go work for somebody, and that I'll never make it out of this. So the only way to make it out was to get lucky, to gamble. So my grandmother took my hard-earned my mother's hard-earned money and went to the casino and lost it all every day. So once my mother got wind that that was what was going on, she didn't want to talk back to grandma or be disrespectful. But grandma had short-term memory. So luckily for my mother, grandma was like, well, what you make today? This is, a few weeks after. And my mother's got the memo now of like what's really going on. So my mother's like, well, I made $2.50. Give me that, baby. So my mother gave her the $2.50 and she saved $2.50. She had made $5 just like she did before, but she now knew that she had to help grandmother help herself because she was financially illiterate. She didn't know any better, couldn't do any better. So my mother learned the value of savings at an early age in, I guess, a survival mindset. And there's three mindsets: surviving mindset, a thriving mindset, and a winning mindset. And these three mindsets are in my book, Up From Nothing, by the way. So initially, my mother had a surviving mindset, and she ultimately got to a thriving mindset. But part of her, that surviving mindset, never left my mother. And the winning mindset, the builder mindset that she blessed, that my parents were able to give me the optionality, I guess, to bless me with. When I say I guess, meaning they didn't give it to me, they gave me the platform, and I wouldn't took it for myself because they didn't know how to build. That was not how they were built. That wasn't how they were oriented. My wife Shacher would say that all behaviors learned behavior. I absolutely believe that. Right? If you hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. Once again, grandma loved everybody, but all she knew was what she knew. So all she could give was the ignorance she had, the lack of knowledge in the area of financial literacy. So mom decided she needed to save and protect that and not share that information because, ignorance was bliss in the household. So mom gained a habit of savings. Now let's fast forward. My mother married a man who abused her. And the number one cause for financial literacy, or the number one cause for divorce, by the way, is money. And the number one reason why police respond to calls is domestic abuse. And the number one cause for domestic abuse, the number one the number one reason why police respond to calls in a household is domestic abuse. And the number one cause for domestic abuse is money. Number one reason for heart attacks, says American Heart Association, is stress. Number one reason for stress is money. So my mother married this man. They had 2 children, my brother and my sister, together. They were stressed about money. Their outflow exceeded their inflow, so their overhead was bound to be their downfall. And he took it out on my mother. And so domestic abuse going on in the household, and he hit her and tried to humiliate her. And she kept saving a little bit on the side for herself and trying to figure out how she's going to get out of this situation. Ladies, does any of this sound familiar? By the way, why does a woman stay with an abusive man? All right. I mean, just real talk. Like, why is a woman on a stripper pole at 3 a.m. with some 300-pound guy throwing cash at her? Because she likes it? Because she likes it? Because she's attracted to this dude? Of course not. It's economics. It's money, right? So just real talk here. Financial literacy and the need for it is everywhere. It's entirely possible that the only true freedom is financial freedom. And I want you to be free. My mother, God rest her soul, who passed on the glory September 10th, 2023. So this episode is dedicated to her. She wanted you to be free. Her credit score was 850 when she was still in the workforce, and it was over 700 after she retired several years later. She wasn't doing financial transactions anymore, but she understood that she wasn't black. She was green, economic, right? She was free. She could do what she wanted. But when she put that her social security number in the computer, whenever she was applying for the computer to look at her and see what color she was, the computer realized that her credit score was extraordinary, outstanding, and above average, and just said yes, whatever it is she wanted. So if she ever later in her life, she got credit access to whatever she wanted because she knew better and could do better. Unlike grandmother, her mother. Back to the story. So I want you to understand that rainbows only follow storms. I want you to understand that you can't grow except through legitimate suffering. I want you to understand that people don't change in good times. Why would you? Right? You only change in bad times. And so my mother had bad times. She realized that this was not working for her, this being the situation with her mother, even though her mother loved her, right? And there'll be people who love you, who say they love you, who don't know how to love you, don't know how to live a successful life. And you're going to need to be bilingual, love them and do something else, do something different. Um, to argue with a fool proves there are two. So I don't want you getting in stupid arguments with people because they say they love you. I want you to accept what they have to give that's beneficial to you, and then make a move that's different for your life in the situations that require a different set of choices and, frankly, intellect, right? A software upgrade. My mother was able to get this software upgrade initially on her own, and then she was with, again, my brother and sister's father. I won't mention his name because it's not positive what I'm saying here. I don't want to. I'm not trying to jam up his legacy, but I didn't like him beating my mother. Hello. So my mother had one last insult too many, and she poured some hot coffee on homeboy. He was sleeping and had demanded some coffee, and so I got some coffee for you. And he said, "I'm gonna kill you," right? And so she knew she had to go. And she prayed to God. She said, "Look, Lord, please just get me out of here with my children." And she had a premonition from God. She told me that God told her that you'll be delivered 2,000 miles from here. And my father, the guy who became my father, Johnny Smith, came through town, East St. Louis, and saw my mother and went crazy. Just fell initially in lust with her, and then in love with her, and was like within a day, like, how do I marry you? And she said, well, you got to take me and my kids before we can have any kind of conversation. And he said, that's great. I live in California. Well, that's about 2,000 miles, right? Almost precisely from where my mother was. So my mother's like, okay, this is God speaking. And so she got out of town before Dave, I'll say that's his name, my brother and sister's father, Dave, before he could find her and do harm to her. Self-preservation. So she had to go, right? Don't let the perfect become the death of the good. Like, this was good enough. The stars aligned and she was out. My father was in town because he was, back in the day, if you were successful and prosperous, my dad owned a construction and cement contracting business. I'll get into his story in a separate podcast episode, Johnny Smith. But he was driving his car to go buy a new car in Detroit, Michigan, and he drove across the country and was seeing some relatives or some friends in East St. Louis. And he was going to the dealership, the manufacturer, to buy a car. That's what they did back in the day, I guess, the profile. And so versus continuing on to Detroit, he met my mother, lost his mind. They turned around, packed up all the clothes, packed up my brother and my sister, and went back to California. And I was born February 6, 1966, at Good Samaritan Hospital in downtown Los Angeles. And they ultimately bought a home on Santa Barbara Boulevard. Now it's called Martin Luther King Boulevard. And started to build a life. And I was the youngest of three children. And I remember, and they had done a great job. They bought a home together. Only 41 to 45% of Black folks own a home today, by the way, compared to 75% of our white counterparts. What's the number one way you build wealth in America? Home ownership. Hello. So they built a home, started building some wealth. They had purchased an 8-unit apartment building across the street, I believe it was. And they were, at some point, I may be getting my math, I think I'm getting the chronology here wrong. I think they bought the 8-unit apartment building first, lived in 1 unit, rented 2 out. That covered the mortgage payment that was sub to $300 a month. Yes, they bought it for $18,000. For anybody who thinks real estate is not magical, that apartment building is worth several $1 million today. I think it's last time I checked, it was $6 million. That's that apartment building is worth. We bought it for $18,000. And the rest of the unit rent, so it was 8 units. So we lived in 1 unit, rented out 2 to cover the mortgage payment. The rest of the units, the 5 units that were left, were profit. And they used that profit, saved that extra money to then put a down payment on their home, the home I'm talking about on Santa Barbara Boulevard. And by the way, we lost the apartment building. I'll get to that in a minute. And I say we lost because that's generational wealth for our family. It wasn't just my mom and my dad. It wasn't just my dad. My dad didn't realize that they had to be better together. Ambassador Andrew Young, my dad was a great hustler, by the way, a great hustler. But there's a difference between making money and building wealth. I'll get into that in a separate podcast. I'm really focused on that. But a lot of black strivers, we think that making that money, getting that dollar, getting that cash, getting that buck, getting that bag is everything. It's actually not, right? You can win the battle and lose the war, and that's exactly what my mother or my father did, and wouldn't listen to my mother. So, but here's the positive part: they were smart enough to buy that apartment building for $18,000, and if they did nothing else but buy that and just hold it, the whole family would be set today. More set than ultimately we ended up being with my mother, by at least 6 times more set. My mother ended up being technically a millionaire when she passed on, but that one apartment building again will be worth $6 million today. We only owed $18,000 when they purchased it. And when you buy a piece of real estate, you get the benefit of the depreciation, a tax benefit. You get the benefit of the appreciation, the equity, and you write off most of the mortgage payments against your income. So it was really win-win-win. Anyway, so we moved from the apartment building, owned it, then got a house. Great, good job. Then we bought a gas station I believe it's at Normandy and Vernon, southeast corner. For those who know Los Angeles geography, you know that gas station is still there today. Just last time I was in LA, it was still there and functioning. We own that gas station. We own a cement contracting business. We owned a little nursery business taking care of knucklehead kids like me before and after school. For working parents, my mother had a side hustle making arts and crafts. I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, mom and dad really argued over money because my dad could make it but couldn't keep it, as I mentioned earlier. And he was a great hustler, but he was not financially literate. And Pastor Young says that men and women fail for 3 reasons: arrogance, pride, and greed. My dad was not greedy, but he was full of pride and slightly arrogant. And he wouldn't ask my mother for advice. And only in a relationship do I think that the math should not work. I love math, to quote my friend Melody Hobson. I love math because it doesn't have an opinion, right? But only in a relationship should the math not work. 2 plus 2, if it doesn't equal 6, 8, or 10, meaning more than 4, what are you doing? Right? You can do better all by yourself. If you're not better together, what are you doing? Right? So dad and mom had the building blocks right, but they didn't have the strategy right. They didn't have the mindset right. They still had a surviving mindset. They didn't together move to a thriving mindset. Again, my mother finally got to a thriving mindset. We're not there yet. And unfortunately, they thought they were builders, but they still had a surviving, hustling mindset and approach. And so end up winning the battle and losing the war, crossing bridges ahead of time, stepping over a dollar to pick up a dime. What do I mean by that? They argued over money. Dad wouldn't listen to mother. He would bid jobs as a cement contractor. He wanted to win the bid. I respect the hustle, but again, not financially literate. So the job was, if the last contractor bid with a client for $1,000, my dad would go in and bid at $900. Well, the materials might be $950. My dad didn't think about that. He thought the cash flow was profit. Wrong. So the more money he made, the broker we got. He made $1 and spent $1.50, and we lost everything. We lost the gas station. We lost the apartment building. We lost our home. And on the verge of losing our home, my mother, again, she was a master at savings. Remember this? Going back to the grandma story, and she would put little seed corns to the side. And then, ladies and gentlemen, if you're married, I want you to trust each other. I want you to be in each other's lives. I want you to all that. But understand that you're meeting a business partner here, and not just a mate. And when you go to the club and you see the dude, he's handsome. Ladies, guys, you see the lady, oh, she's fine. Don't just ask their name, ask their credit score. right? And I'm joking, but I'm serious, right? Because this is a business partner for the rest of your life. So you want to have a joint account, right? And you want to have a separate account to make sure that if you find out this person is actually not financially literate, that they tear their own rear end. They're not tearing yours, uh, the collective yours at the same time. You need to be the backup plan for your family. So my mother had a separate little account that she had set up, um, and she wasn't hiding from my father. My father knew it was there, and she had saved $4,000, which was a lot of money back then. This is 1968. No, this was 1970. I was 4 or 5 years old, between 3 and 5 years old, if I get the math right. So sometime between 60, I was born in 66, 68, 69, 70, 71, that time period. Anyway, $4,000, a lot of money. My mother had saved this $4,000 to send my brother to a college of his choice because she wanted him to move from a surviving mindset to a thriving mindset, right? A thriving mindset. So surviving mindset is freedom. First Reconstruction, free slavery. Out of slavery, you're free. Second Reconstruction, civil rights movement, getting access to jobs, access to careers, access to education, access to the polling booth, access to public facilities, uh, restrooms of your choice, all that stuff, being able to have access. Of course, third Reconstruction, which is we're in today, that Operation Hope is helping to lead, is a movement from the streets to the suites, from civil rights to civil rights, right? The third Reconstruction, the color's not black or white, it's green. It's not red or blue, it's green. It's economics, it's opportunity for all. It's about writing checks, not just cashing them. So we're in the second Reconstruction now. We're in the 60s and the 70s. And my mother knew that for my brother to do better, he needed a higher education. And you know better, you do better. And so she had a high school education. In fact, she went back to high school at age 62 and marched with cap and gown with 18-year-olds to get her high school equivalency. My mother's a bad sister. Whew. And I was there watching her, so proud of her. So she didn't have a high school education, a completion degree. Neither did my dad, by the way. And to give you a little bit of inspiration, I had a GED degree, which Chris Rock calls a good enough diploma. Now I've got honorary doctorate degrees from several universities and colleges, and I'm on the board of Clark Atlanta University. And most people who work for me have a college degree. I think actually everybody who works for me has a college degree, advanced degree. So I'm obsessed with education. Around my library right now, it's nothing but books. I love making smart sexy, right? I think we've been making dumb sexy for way too long. We've dumbed down and celebrated it, and now we've got to make smart sexy again. So my brother was set to go to a college of his choice to be whoever he wanted. My father got to the bank first and took that $4,000. Unfortunately, my mother had him as a signer on the account, so you might want to have until you embed yourself into going from we're about me to about we. It may take a minute for you guys to come together as one, and you trust each other, not just romantically, but about money and business decisions, and you're on the same accord. You might want to have an account with just your own name on it, and then he has an account or she has an account with their name on it, and you have a joint account until things evolve. So I'll do a whole podcast on marriage. So don't in the history of marriage and all that stuff. So don't worry about that. So um, he got the money and wasted it on some harebrained idea he had to get a bag. My dad did, and of course he lost it, just like my grandmother lost it, because they were both financially illiterate. Good people, but financially illiterate. And my brother could not go to a college of his choice, and it broke my mother's heart. And the first thing so that's how my brother ended up going to the Navy. And he went to the Navy because he could get a 4-year education if he signed up for military service. He thought he signed up for 4 years. Of course, it's like they know the psychology in the military. Once you're there, you probably stay there if you had a good experience. So he signed up for 4 years, re-signed up, and had a career in the Navy, became a non-commissioned officer, a great career in intelligence there, and ended up retiring to Hawaii, marrying somebody who lives in Hawaii. He retired from the Navy, works for the Navy as a private contractor with his family. And it's a beautiful story, but it wasn't his choice. His whole story is defined by that $4,000 moment where he did not have self-determination, right? But what would his life be? How would it be different, right? If if he had gone to a college of his choice and become a dentist or a doctor or a banker or a business person or an engineer or whatever, right? It doesn't matter what it was, but it could have been his choice, and he just didn't do that. And as a result of that, well, I just told you the story, right? He's a great life, but it wasn't his choice, and that was enough. My mother had enough, and my mother said, "I'm out." And that became the fight of all fights. And my dad, they had domestic abuse, came to blows. They were calling the police to get my dad off my mother, beating her up. And she put off a 3-inch pump, popped him on the head. Hair didn't grow on the top of his head until his last dying days from that pop. So he learned not to do that with my mother again. But she was out. She left. We left with the shirt on her back and her kids. And we went to go stay with somebody she said was my uncle, OC, was really her girlfriend and her boyfriend, whose name was OC. But in order to make me feel comfortable, make the kids feel comfortable, she said that was my uncle. And I was playing and she was staying there with her girlfriend and her boyfriend to save money for her to buy her first house on her own. Again, here's that same lesson again. The basics. Learning, spending less than you make, putting a little aside for the future. So she's working as a seamstress now at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft, which later became Boeing, and making, equivalent of today of $15, $18 an hour. And she worked, save. And while she was doing that, I built a relationship with the guy, OC, who again I thought was my uncle. And I was playing on the porch one day and I fell. And I was swallowing my tongue. I was choking. And he cleared my throat. He cleared my throat passage and saved my life. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. So I adored this guy, right? And he got murdered in front of me. In order to save money in order to take care of his family and ours staying with him, he didn't have a conversation with us saying, "Hey, I can't afford to have you guys stay with me. Let's talk about this." Again, Pastor Young's quote: "Men and women fail for 3 reasons: arrogance, pride, and greed." He could have just had a conversation with us. My mother would have contributed some money, but he decided he was going to go to work, his legit job. Then he was going to go out again, and he was going to sell drugs part-time. And it was marijuana. It was in the wrong neighborhood, and those guys took it very seriously. They followed him home. They said, "You're in the wrong territory," and they dragged him. They hit him with a truck and dragged him. He was on a bicycle, and that was right in front of me, in front of the house. And I think they did it because I could see him, send a message, and they killed him right in front of me. And I still have that image in my head. So I saw my first death, and that was about money. So the first death was the death of our parents' net worth, family structure, generational wealth. First murder was OC getting murdered in front of me. All this is about money. And my best friend George got murdered over money, selling drugs with the next door neighbor Tweet, who we moved into. My mother bought our first home, 15502 South Fraley in Compton, California. And she bought that house, and I became friends with George, who was real smarter than me, by the way. So intellect alone is not enough. And but George had the wrong role model, wrong mindset, and got murdered hanging out with Tweet. So watch who you hang around. Again, you hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. Whoever you hang around, whatever you see is who you will be. And so I could go on and on and on about my mother, but the story here is that she bought that house. We lived in it. It was the beginning of her generational wealth. She built equity, and then she sold that house, bought another house, sold that house, used the equity to buy another house. She did that 7 times, and she ended up with a net worth of $1 million. And I know that because she gave some money to my sister and my brother to buy a home a couple times. And of course, I'm the manager of her estate. trustee of her estate, because she had a will. I want everybody to have a will when she passed on to glory. So hopefully she's an inspiration to you. She lives on today. She has a fund in her name, and her legacy lives. And hopefully now you know that even if you're a single parent, you can still make it. You can work an hourly job and build a net worth of $1 million and live a life of dignity and self-reliance. You can be free. It is possible. The only freedom is financial freedom, because every other freedom can be taken away from you. But my mother's story is a very simple one. She took a message from her grandmother. She loved her, but my grandmother didn't know better, couldn't do better. And she used that lesson for the rest of her life, to take an hourly income and turn it into generational wealth. And she passed it on to her kids, so her kids would have optionality and choice. And now the three of us are living our truth, because my mother lived her life, not only for herself, not just for me, but for we. This is John O'Brien, and this is how you not only you make some money, but you build some wealth, and you have that dignity inside of you that no one can take from you. All right, let's go.